Okay, so the last part I want to talk a little bit about the debates and controversies about global IR and also the contributions. I already mentioned this. Actually, I mentioned several of these points I'm going to make again, but I'll go through them briefly. So in terms of the controversy debate, of course, like any new idea, new theory, new approach, you expect disagreements and debates. So there are sort of three main areas of criticism of global IR or debate. Um, but I think underlying all that is the fact that it's relatively new, and this idea is relatively new, and a lot of the criticism is about, especially the very first one, does it reproduce or redefine the discipline? It's about, I don't know, I have to be careful in how to put this because many of the critics are also my very good friends. And as a former president of ISA, I've worked with them. I respect all of them. And personally, I'm very good friends with them as well. So I don't want to say anything that's unduly harsh. But I think it has to do with the fact that, turf, T-U-R-F, turf battle. So global IR may take the shine away from post-colonialism, or post-colonialism, like decolonialism, takes the shine away from post-colonialism. Everybody wants to have their own niche. Everybody wants to have their own territory. They don't want intruders, or if there is something new, they want to say, no, this is different. So I'm fascinated by this, but I'm not surprised as an academic myself. Many of these disagreements I don't see as substantial. They all have the same purpose of redefining and broadening IR, but some of them are basically also repeating the same thing, West versus the rest, or West, non-West, the global IR, despite hundreds of times we are saying, no, that's not the intention. These are terms that are of convenience. There's no West, there's no non-West. It's not a binary that post-colonial scholars dislike very much. I don't mind binaries. I mean, I think sometimes you have to have juxtapositions to make some sense. But I think a lot of the, whether, pluralistic universalism is too narrow about than pluriversalism. There's a new term. Now, well, I tell them that pluralistic universalism is just those words that are patched together. Pluralistic universalism is pluriversalism. I don't see any difference between what you are saying and I'm saying, and I respect what you are saying. But the same thing you said, you have something saying profoundly different, and that as if pluriversalism talks about multiple universalisms. I think I'm very happy with multiple universalism. In fact, the beginning premise of global IR in the book that every civilization considers itself as universal. Indians think they have universal. Their civilization is universal. Muslims think their civilization is universal. The Chinese think their civilization is universal. The very idea of a global civilization, but the very idea of civilization is that when a significant chunk of people think of themselves as universal, that their ideas are applicable to all. The only exception were the Mongols. The Mongols never really tried to preach their religion to anybody, and they did not teach their language. They didn't take any, well, they were kind of initially Buddhist before they became Muslims, but they also had their Tengri religion. So no converts, they never imposed their religion or culture or language on anybody. But they never thought ours is the best system. They just were a very practical civilization, wanted to make a lot of money, wealth, get out of their relative isolation, and at some point they became power hungry, but never really thought theirs is the universal civilization. But every other civilization thought of themselves as the best and the most universal. That goes with civilization. That's why we have this class of egoisms among civilizations. But pluriversal universalism or pluralistic universalism or pluriversalism basically rejects universalism because I use the term universalism. But pluriversalism is a form of ism too, and that there is no difference. That global IR doesn't really talk about multiple, singular universalism. There's one universalism. No. In fact, several. That's because every civilization considers itself as universal. But I'm never going to be able to convince them. And I don't want to fight with them too much because many of them are my very good friends. And when they launch the new journal, there's a new journal. You should be very aware of this, and you may be good to publicize it. There is a new journal called Pluriversal International Relations. It's going to be published by Bristol University Press, and the editor is a Taiwanese scholar who now in Japan, and he just invited me to join their editorial board, and I was very happy to do that. Because I don't want to be seen as a global IR and being different from this proves my point that there's a lot of common ground, and we are actually in the same cause. There is also this idea of a non-Western and post-Western. Well, I can see non-Western is negative and non-Western, okay, defined in opposition to the West, and that's the term I wanted to get away from. So that's a global. Post-Western, to say that the post-Western is more radical, I don't buy that. Because first, unless you're talking about, again, similar to what I'm talking about, post-colonialism and global IR, the global IR does not reject existing theories. So if post-Western theory thinks everything must start new, I don't buy that. The last thing you want to do is to create another kind of a anti-Western, the Western civilization is all trust, and it's not. But it is ethnocentric. Overall, the idea of the West has been very oppressive for the rest. So the idea is to get rid of the West versus the rest, rather than just say everything that the West did was bad, everything the rest did is good. Although my book, I say that my book is somehow slanted in that direction because we know enough about the goodness of the West and the achievements, not enough about the achievements of the rest. But I want to get rid of this by creating mutual respect between the West and the rest, by saying that the rest is capable of also contributing to world order. World order is nobody's monopoly, and that's something I'll talk about later. But in global IR, this comes up because it came out of the non-Western IR theory, and doesn't reject existing theories. So people come up with ideas that we need to have something more pluriversal, post-Western, rather than global. Okay. I think this is all very good. I welcome it. It helps to advance the cause, which is more important than the person. But it is ultimately boils down to academics trying to define their own turf and create something new that's different from what has been out there previously. And as I said, I am very respectful of them. Pinar Bilgin from Turkey was my program assistant for ISF residency. Many of them have a lot of respect for them, and let them have their say, and it's good for the discipline. But I don't think global IR just reproduces the discipline. It broadens the discipline, not reproduce it. Reproducing is basically doing exactly the same thing. We add so much into global IR in a very fundamental way. And some of these ideas that global IR draws from other civilizations are profoundly subversive of existing concepts. For example, when I say that, you know about traditional IR, realism, liberalism, they talk about Westphalianism, Westphalia at the beginning of IR. They talk about Magna Carta at the beginning of human rights. Global IR says no. So diplomacy, the system of independent states, okay, that's what we're talking about. The states, the international relations should be organized around independent states. It's not a Westphalian idea. It's a Sumerian idea. Sumerian republics, Sumerian city-states. It's not in the Greek idea either. Sumerians preceded the Greek city-states by 2,000 years. The idea of a great power concert, this is my article in the New York Times that you have, part of it. Well, it's not the concert of Europe. It started with Amarna, 15th century BC, before Christ, BC, with the power of Egypt, Mitanni, Assyria, Babylon, the Kasamite kingdom, Babylon, and the Hittites, created a great power system which is maintained peace for at least 200 years in the region, through diplomacy, through communication, treaties. And these are not fancies of imagination, they're documented. You will find there were cuneiform tablets with the correspondence written on them, still available now to read and translate, written in Akkadian, but they've been translated into English. It talks about how great powers maintain peaceful relationships. So it's not the concept of Europe. Neither Westphalia, the system of independent states, nor the concert, great power cooperation, are uniquely Western. Now, why isn't that subversive? Why isn't that something new? So we are keeping realism is okay because countries behave according to national interest. There is realpolitik always. Liberalism talk about cooperation, institutions, although they're very ethnocentric in some ways. But it's ethnocentric means they think all these things came from Europe and philosophers Locke and Kant and others. But these are not unique to liberalism in the West. So by telling them that you have to go back and look at other forms of cooperation is also very subversive. It challenges their very identity. So to say that it produces the discipline is completely, totally wrong. But that's one criticism. Okay, I want you to put on the table. I think it redefines the discipline. It brings a lot of new ideas. It creates a whole new research agenda. You can write. I have a different lecture. I could talk about how it can help with teaching. You can use this for courses. You can do your research. You can extend, and without becoming anything like post-colonial or realist or liberal. You can start in fact, I am thinking that it'll be great to look at the Amarna diplomacy of 15th century BC to see how great powers of the day maintained their cooperation, because the documents are available now. And nobody in the West has done it except a handful of historians and a handful of international relations scholars. There's a big field here for young scholars to look at these ancient documents. Free trade in the Indian Ocean, I can talk about it next lectures. Also, origins of open seas, the openness of seas, that the seas are common to all humankind, doesn't belong to any empire, is actually very much an Indian Ocean practice, from Africa to Middle East, Arabian Peninsula to India to the Malabar and Coromandel coast to all the way to Malacca. This idea was invented here. No empire extended its jurisdiction, including the Mughals, did not extend their jurisdiction to the sea. The jurisdiction of the Mughal emperor ended on land. When the Sultan of Maldives complained to the Subedar, Mughal Subedar of Odisha at that time, that the Portuguese are harassing them for paying taxes, so the Subedar consulted the Mughal emperor and said, sorry, our emperor's writ extends only to land. We don't control the seas. No empire controlled the seas, because seas was common to all. The Sultan of Makassar said to the Dutch that God created land and the sea. The land he gave to men, the sea he left in common. We have never heard that anybody could interfere with the trade in the seas. There you go. Global IR is subversive of the realist and the liberal narratives about where these ideas come from. It's profoundly new and it redefines the discipline. It's not reproducing it. Just because it doesn't say we want to get rid of realism and liberalism or constructivism terms. Now, somebody asked me whether I was a constructivist. I am, in fact. I actually did a lot of my initial work in constructivism. I actually still do a lot of work on norms, security, communities, and identity. I don't see theories as being either or. So global IR, because it is overarching, it subsumes other theories, you can actually be a realist and do global IR. You can do liberal, be a liberal and do global IR, and I am a constructivist who does global IR. And I found some versions of constructivism as too Western-centric, because they talk about good norms coming mostly from the West. But I challenge that with localization and subsidiarity theories. But that doesn't mean I stopped being a constructivist. All right. So that's the idea. My claim here, you can read about this in some of the literature, and you can make up your own mind. But it is good to have this kind of debate, But it's also good to be aware that sometimes academics love to battle with each other. And I think generally that's how knowledge advances. The Indians have fierce debates, like argumentative Indian Amartya Sen. The Muslims, Arab philosophers, have fierce debates between, say, Abu Ghazali and Abu Sina and Ibn Rushd, because they did not agree on the creation of the universe. So did the liberals have debates. In fact, the liberals had more of a consensus than debate. So why shouldn't we have debate in global IR? Okay, will it lead to fragmentation of the discipline? I already answered that question about a Chinese IR, African IR, Indian IR, this kind of national IRs emerging. So I think that is a genuine concern, but it's also necessary because, again, scholars and students in a particular area or country may feel marginalized by Western dominance. They want to have their voice. So it's like creating a regional organization to advance your voice at the global stage because you are not getting recognition. So why Chinese IR is emerging? Because Chinese IR scholars felt marginalized by Western, and they can't speak the language very well. They have a lot of rich literature in Chinese language. It doesn't get recognized by the Westerners, and they get disparaged. So they said, we will have Chinese School of IR. Now, it's very natural. But it can only work if it tries to also to avoid exceptionalism, that this is the only truth, and also these national schools can travel and apply to other regions of the world. A good example is actually English school. English school is not about England. It's actually a theory that can apply to the whole world. And that's what Barry Buzan does. I am not an English school scholar, but I work with him because I find it has a lot of resonance with global IR. So it's not about explaining what happens in England or Europe, although it might have begun like that. The response to the European decline and to recognize Europe's role in creating modern world order. It was very ethnocentric in the beginning, but later on became very open with Barry Buzan and Richard Little, who was my colleague in Bristol. So I think just like English school is not about England or Europe, Chinese school should not be about China or Eastern Asia. It should have global applicability. If we do that, I have no problems with fragmentation. I have no problems with the emergence of national schools. I don't see it as fragmentation. I see it as pluralization. I use the term, you have plurality, you have a broadening, and that's healthy. But again, with the caveat that don't become too narrow and only try to explain things, and don't explain things for policymakers. A lot of these national schools sometimes can become apologies for national governments by creating culturalism or cultural pride. So every time I talk about Kautilya, I get really scared and hesitant because I think it might be picked up, and this is, modern India is following Kautilya, and this is our nationalist pride. Kautilya, actually, a lot of it is misunderstanding of Kautilya. So, or for the other reason, when you talk about ancient India's greatness, I also worry about it because it can become the basis of nationalism and ethnocentrism. But it's also a genuine way of building knowledge, but it runs the risk of being used against the minorities and also your other states. So I'm very much aware of civilization states using culture, history to advance narrow regime agendas. But that is not the excuse, and I hope academics can rise above that. That is not the excuse to avoid all engagement with history and culture. So fragmentation of the discipline because of national schools is a real problem, but you can call it pluralization. It increases diversity. If global South scholars don't look at their own history, where are they going to get a lot of the ideas from? Now, it has been always possible for Western IR scholars to look at Greco-Roman history, European history, to develop theories. Why can't global South scholars do the same? So there's a bit of an epistemic double standards here. It's okay for say, American philosophers or American IR scholars or American British IR scholars to look at Greece and Rome and Athens and yeah, Sparta, talk about Thucydides' trap or other kind of concepts. And it's not okay for Chinese, Indians, and Muslim scholars, Islamic scholars to talk about their past and derive theories. The risk is only if they're becoming narrow and they use it for a particular political regime purpose, or where they fail to expand those insights to other areas of the world. But if they do that, that's quite okay. And it's possible to do that. I've seen some writings from China that not only explains about Chinese IR, like moral realism concept from Yan Xuetang. He said this can actually apply to the whole world. And actually, I think it does. It applies to contemporary United States. Well, a realist foreign policy has lost morality. You can be a realist and moral. But the United States at the moment, personal qualities of leaders, which is very much part of the moral realist agenda, is falling apart. So I think it applies to not only, actually more to the United States, to the Chinese at the moment. So that's why I want to not worry too much about fragmentation of the discipline. Call it pluralization. Having these voices, national schools is okay as long as they are broadly applicable, they can travel, and they don't fall victim, they're not abused by governments to serve their political purpose. And finally, the practicality of global IR, which is a very tough question. We do have resource constraints, facilities, libraries, and access to journals, both to read and to publish, and the language barriers, because the working language of IR is English. That's not true, by the way, in Latin America. A lot of great work in Latin America gets published in Spanish, a little bit in Portuguese in Brazil. Again, a lot of our work in China is published in Chinese, Indonesian. But Western scholars don't pay attention to that because they can't read it. So that's a barrier. And global IR cannot be global without the linguistic sort of emancipation or more translation, more communication among different parts of the world. Okay, then there is still the hegemonic position of IR. We talked about this at the gatekeeping, Western journals, Western magazines, not all of them, by the way. To be very fair, the journals of the International Studies Association have become very broad. They have now, I think most of them have abstracts in multiple languages, and they also encourage submissions from non-Western scholars. Even some Western journals, other Western journals have become like that, but there are several journals who are very gatekeepers, and they just don't, they find all kinds of excuses. Quality issues, not having theory, or theory being most Western. They're very non-adventurous. So getting published there is difficult. But there are increasing number of journals that are opening up the field. And when I was president of ISA, one of the things I sort of pushed for is to have editorial board of most ISA journals to have committee members from non-Western, advisory committee members from non-Western countries. So we had a selection of 15, 20 scholars. We got them into editorial boards. That's not everything, but it's something. And I see the trend in a positive direction, but long way to go. But you have more outlets. And you know, the other thing is, in the age of social media and the internet, sometimes you find blogs are read more widely than journals under a paywall. Okay, so it's actually very, very liberating. I have deliberately published some stuff in the blogs which has open access because I think more people will read it. And you should not be totally afraid to, I know the university still will not give you credit, but I think there's no harm in having your voice heard through blogs. There is a great outlet called EIR, International Relations. In fact, when I published my book, one of the first articles I wrote after New York Times was in EIR, International Relations, open access. It encourages students, young scholars to submit and they don't do gatekeeping. They edit, help you edit, and you get published and you get a lot of downloads. So, so try that too. Not sure there are such things in India, but there may be. But there are good open access blogs that you should try to. But it's very hard still to cancel out, counter the Western hegemony. It will probably take another generation. But I think what I've seen in my last 11 years or so, although I have done this for 20 years now, I think the situation has improved in most parts of the world except the United States, where it may have gone backwards. Because some of the universities are fiercely gatekeepers, even though they don't have really faculty that can beat the faculty of other parts of the world or other universities. But because of the traditional reputation, they have become like that, gatekeepers. All right, but I still think global IR has a future with its like-minded theories and approaches, whatever you call it, including post-colonial, decolonial, and the others. But these are some of the examples. Actually, there are several others that have come up, books, but there are also dozens and dozens of articles coming out every month, every year, and it's a field that is, I think, growing. Now, one thing you should keep in mind that it doesn't matter whether you use the term global IR, okay? That was not the intention. The intention was to give a space, voice, to create consciousness that the field is narrow and needs to be expanded. Now, if you write an article and don't give me credit, I have no problems with this. Don't use the word global IR, although it's nice to have a bunch of references for publication, but whatever you call it, that's not the issue. So the idea of this school that you are doing, the GIAN program, is you have global IR, but even if you call it something else, and you invite me, I will still come. I did not come because of global IR. I think the sole idea is to expand the field. And global IR gives you an entry to it, as Beverly Locher, Catherine Owen pointed out. It's a discursive tool to critique the reproduction of Western-centric knowledge. But I also think it empowers voices from the global South that would normally not be heard. And that's why it gets a lot of attention in there. So I will stop here and I will take your questions. In the next whatever time we have. So again, please, Dr. Begg is not here. Is there anybody going to moderate it, or I'll be happy to do this myself. Again, speak slowly, speak loud, use the microphone. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Where?
Here.
Okay.
Sir, my question to you is how your concept of global IR will respond to the establishment of global peace.
Yeah.
Because, there is a concept of clash of civilization given by S.P. Huntington, and your concept global IR is also taking into account the civilizations. So, how it will help or contribute to the establishment of peace,
yes.
Preventing wars at the global level. It can be at the regional level and amongst the civilizations as well.
Excellent. And I also want to commend you. This is the ideal model question, okay? And I'm telling this to my son also. When you ask a question in the class, this is the way that you express your voice. It's not just, I'm not talking about language or accent or anything, just talking about slow, steady, clear question. And thank you very much. And I would love to answer that. Let's have some more questions. Sure. Just get, yeah.
Why don't you give the mic? Yeah, he's also asking.
Everybody will get a chance. We have some time, so don't worry about it.
Just first pick up some
Yeah.
Good, good afternoon, sir.
Over there. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my question is, how does the rise of
Right of
artificial intelligence (AI),
AI. Okay.
and the virtual world reshape global international relation in 21st centuries?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. You should remind them to introduce themselves. Yeah.
Please introduce
First,
yourself and
first,
then ask a question.
first you introduce yourself, then you ask question.
Yeah. Tell your name and affiliation. That'll be great. I always like to know where you're from, and yeah.
Sir, my name is Ahmed. And sir, my question is, sir, do you think the development of national IR narratives is a threat to the global IR narrative as a whole? Because every national narrative tries to project itself as superior. And then if this is the case, so could the evolution of global IR narrative, is it possible or is it a threat to the whole case?
Thank you very much for that very clear and straight question. Yes. Anybody else? We have three now on the table. Over here. Yeah. I think I can have another Coke while we becoming like Donald Trump, except that he drinks normal Coke. Yeah.
Sir, Nishant from Ajmer. Sir, while answering the AI question, can you also add Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, the Palantir group, which are sort of infiltrating the American democracy and pushing for automation?
What group?
Palantir, Palantir, Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, who have been the major lobbyists for the Trump administration involving Elon Musk. So these are the people who are non-state actors who want the state system to wither away.
Okay.
They want the global corporations to sort of dominate the the global affairs because they feel state actors are incompetent.
Okay. Okay. That's a good question. So another AI related question. Yeah. Or technology related question. Yeah. So there are four.
So how pluriversalism is dealing with the homogenization of globalization, because globalization is somewhere down the line is creating homogenization, and
Homogenization.
yes, sir.
Sorry, what is creating? I missed the first.
Globalization, whether
How pluriversalism is
Globalized.
tackling globalization.
Okay.
To be-
Got it. Okay, so there are four questions. I'd like to get questions from those who have not spoken. So feel free. I mean, this is your chance, and I'm very happy to take questions from people who, I don't know why, you don't feel shy. If you want, you can write down your questions and pass it to me. I did that routinely to my students as well. So
Anybody can ask from that gallery also.
yeah, from the gallery, just feel free. I mean, those who have not had their say, have your say. It's a bit far away, but I'm sure you can. You have a microphone over the gallery. We can pass you a microphone. They're also participants, right? Oh, okay. So that's
They have paid more and that's why they're sitting in the balcony. Okay, you just take up this question.
so. There are 5 questions I can answer before you think of the next round. So global IR, global peace. So there are many ways global IR can contribute to global peace. First of all, there are ways of creating peace that contemporary IR doesn't capture. Okay, so because a lot of our imagination about peace, like the Kantian idea of perpetual peace, the idea of peace through strength, the idea of even peace through communication. If not the idea, but the examples that we give are mainly drawn from the Western civilization, right? So either it's European Kantian ideas, or whether it's the Lockean liberal peace idea from John Locke and John Stuart Mill, or whether it is the idea of the Hegelian idea of end of history. Many of the ideas, sorry, examples are drawn from Western experience, Western history. But there are also not only similar ideas, but also different ideas and different ways of maintaining peace that are come from other civilizations. So I would like to think that the possibility of global peace will look better if you think the peace is not the monopoly of Western civilization. It can actually derive approaches to peace from other civilizations. Now, when you talk about, there is no such thing as a peaceful civilization, okay? There's no such thing. I make it very clear in this book that every civilization has attraction and ugliness. Every civilization has committed genocide. And I started with this book with King Ashoka. I grew up in a place that's 7 kilometers of the Peace Pagoda of Dhauli, where allegedly, I mean, the Kalinga War was fought there, although there is some controversy about it. Ashoka, king of Magadha, went to Kalinga, which was independent at that time, defeated the state. A war took what, 100,000 dead, 150,000 taken slaves, and then he became a Buddhist and most peaceful emperor because he renounced war forever, right? But remember, he killed 100,000 people first. He enslaved 150,000 people. He never renounced Kalinga from his empire, right? So as a Kalingan myself, I have mixed feelings about that. But that also, I also have profound respect for King Ashoka because he not only propagated, I don't propagate Buddhism, that's credit, but I care less about that than the fact that he never fought a war again, instructed his children and descendants never to fight a war again. Now, no other emperor that I know of has done that. So this thing I started my book with is very inspirational, but it also shows you that he was not a some of this peacefulness of Ashoka might have been exaggerated by Sri Lankan Srihanlis Buddhist chronicles to make Buddhism look good, atonement and transformation. But I have no problem believing because I have done enough research on Ashoka to know that it's actually real that he became more pacifist, although how long it took it, how it happened is controversial. So if Western scholars are students, and again, I have a lot of respect for Western leaders and Western analysts, but my target audience is students who are learning history. And that's why when I say I don't care less about what leaders think about it, doesn't mean I don't think that they don't matter. Now, just I'm saying that my main audience is the students. When you tell them that nobody has heard about King Ashoka, nobody has heard about the peace studies in the discipline, these approaches to peace. So that expands the base for peace. You will find also the traditions from the Confucian tradition. I mean, I know people are skeptical of Confucianism, but it's a very peaceful tradition. It talks about just government. It gives the people the right to rebel against their government if the government is cruel and unjust and capricious and imposes high taxes and is not benevolent. It talks about, Confucius talks about benevolence, not just peace. But you have similar traditions in Christianity, the just war tradition, peace. So Jewish traditions, swords into plowshares, whatever the state of Israel is doing now is really against the foundations of the Jewish tradition. So you find that in Africa. So if you think that peace has a universal broad basis, you are expanding the legitimacy of peace, which is very scarce in today's world, especially in the last 10 years or so. Right. AI and global IR, I must say I haven't thought deeply about it. It's kind of came on to us very suddenly. But I see like social media, like internet, as a two-way two double-edged sword, so to speak. So it can actually help the cause of global IR. In fact, you can do a little experiment and just search global IR, and it actually sometimes comes up with very good answers, initial answers. So initially I was skeptical, and my son will tell you a lot about it. He's very concerned about global IR, but I think AI, but I think AI can also help you to amalgamate a whole bunch of, because AI is not an independent source. AI draws from, especially when it comes to social sciences, AI draws from existing sources. So you can actually do things with AI on different ideas, concepts, and it comes up with very interesting answers. And I also encourage you to look at both ChatGPT and DeepSeek. They do different things, but DeepSeek doesn't always bring out criticisms of China. I think that's what my son was telling me. But they does a good job of global IR. But in terms of empowering certain elites, like Elon Musk type of elites, I think that's a real concern. And the influence on the current administration, the president, but especially the vice president, is a real concern. But that is the system that allows you to do so in the United States, because the laws and rulings of the United States allows private groups to have this kind of influence. And by the way, it can also happen in non-Western societies, but in United States, the system is geared to favor the wealthy or the influential, including high technology groups. And the United States doesn't have a kind of tradition of mass movements, uprisings against these sort of things. There have been some things about, we had demonstrations against no more dictators or empires, but I don't think it's the same. If these things happen in elsewhere, people might rise up a bit more. The United States is because it's a wealthy country, people are generally don't feel the need to rebel. So far, it's not gone to the stage of Vietnam War type of protest, but it can happen. And I think you have Occupy Wall Street a few years ago. Maybe Occupy Silicon Valley will happen. I'm not advocating it, but it's possible that if not NGOs, but people might think it's to expose this. The media is exposing it, but the media is also polarized. But I think AI can be profoundly empowering of autocratic tendencies. There is something called technological dictatorship and authoritarianism, and that is happening. But I also see AI at the lower level, the non-rich level, general level, helping to spread a lot of ideas that will be otherwise hidden for view, making them easily accessible. So I am not totally against AI in the classroom within certain limits, but I cannot do much about AI and the hold of the tech elite on certain governments, especially maybe in the United States today. Then globalization, national IR is a threat to global IR. I think I answered this question, but it's useful to repeat that. It's not necessarily a threat. It depends on who is doing and how is it being done. So if any national IR scholar or advocate of any national IR thinks of herself, himself as superior, reject it. No, that will be totally unacceptable. Luckily, I haven't seen a lot of scholars who do that. The people who do Chinese School of IR don't say that, to the best of my knowledge. The founder of National Chinese School of IR, Chin Ya-Chin, was one of the people I invited, Barry and I invited to Singapore in doing our non-Western IR theory conference. And when he wrote his book and edited, he acknowledges that this idea came from outside China. He completely acknowledges it and acknowledges myself and Barry and also later to the global IR paradigm. So I don't see them, they see themselves as having got this idea from outside. That's quite striking. And there are some Chinese scholars who would think this idea of Tianxia, all under heaven, all Chinese, But look, the Chinese are ethnocentric people, right? But so are the Indians. There is much more ethnocentric debate going around in Delhi than in Beijing. Um, and I don't have to tell you that because I am kind of detached from it. But I do see, in the context of foreign policy, world order debates, the Chinese and Indians, if there is a competition between who is more nationalistic and ethnocentric, I think the jury is out. So they're almost equal. There. So I think anybody who tells you that is to be criticized, avoided, and even condemned. But luckily, some of the best IR scholars don't do that, because IR scholars are basically, there is still some respect for autonomy and independence of thought, despite all the temptations of working for governments and influencing government opinion. And globalization and fragmentation, I don't see them as well. If your question is globalization is leading to fragmentation or globalization can coexist with globalization, my take on globalization is very simple. Globalization is not an invention of the World Economic Forum, a steam engine, or the European voyages in the 15th century. It started with the Indian Ocean region. That's what I see when the empires of well, you can say between 5th century to about European arrival in the 16th, late 15th, 16th, we see a series of interlinked empires, the Chinese, the Song dynasty, particularly, and the Tang dynasty. Then you had the Gupta Empire did a lot of globalization connected. Then a lot of the ideas from India migrated to Middle East or to Baghdad, the Caliphate, Abbasid Caliphate, from a place during the Gupta Empire, from the state of Ujjain, which is nearby here. The idea of zero, you know where zero came from, Ujjain to Baghdad, translated. Siddhanta, there is a text in my book that discusses this. And then it got become Arabic numerals and then became Western numerals. So then you had trade, East African trade, linking up with West Indian trade and East Indian trade with Malacca. There was really a very thriving globalization in terms of communication and ideas. It's not the Silk Road, by the way. Silk was not the most traded commodity in the Indian Ocean. It was the spices and cotton. The Chinese falsely claim it to be the maritime Silk Road. There is no maritime Silk Road. I have said that repeatedly. This is a contemporary invention of the Chinese. There was a Eurasian Silk Road, yes, and silk was one of the commodities that traded. But cotton and spices and Buddhist goods, Buddhist relics and worshipping objects were far more important. So I call it the Nirvana Road, not the Silk Road in the Indian Ocean. The Chinese participated, as did the Indians, Southeast Asians, in the Eastern Indian Ocean. In the Western Indian Ocean, it was cotton, it was natural ivory and camphor, but it was thriving. It was it connected Africa, and Africa, not just East Africa, because a lot of trade in Africa came trans-Sahara to East Africa and then got transported to Indian Ocean. The Arabian Aden, Hormuz Peninsula region, which linked Europe as well, and then Asia. So there are 4 continents, and also went all the way to East Asia, to China and Japan. So this was actually a globalization. The Europeans simply added the Latin American, what do we call the Americas. But that doesn't mean the globalization was not there before. So John Hobson calls it Oriental globalization. So if you keep that in mind, then what is happening today is that globalization is not ending, it's taking a new form. For the first time in 5 centuries, the Eastern countries are becoming drivers of globalization. So globalization of the future will be driven more by the East than the West, unlike the last 500 years. It will be probably more driven by countries like China, India, and also the some of the states in the Middle East, but not all. Maybe in Africa, South Africa, and Nigeria will be important, but certainly it will be Eastern driven, and it will be less about trade or transaction or manufactured items. It could be also about ideas and technology. And I think many people now believe that globalization, future globalization is going to be more driven by technology than manufactured items. So AI will play an important role. So that is not the end of globalization. It's globalization becoming more driven by technology, more driven by the Eastern countries, and our Asian countries. Asia is rising faster than other regions of the world, and it will also lead to probably, I think this is a controversial thing, less imperialism. That the Western globalization started with imperialism, right? Uh, Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spanish, the English. Okay, so it was basically synonymous with imperialism. Now, there are criticisms of China Belt and Road being a neo-imperial project. It's nothing of the scale. Nothing. There is no territorial control per se. I mean, you can have exceptions to that here and there. But to compare these two, it's completely misnomer. And it's not Chinese only. There are other. India is also having its own say on globalization, and it's an actor, it's a driver, and Singapore is a driver, Korea is a driver, and Japan is a driver. So there will be more non-Western actors. I think, I dare say, that will be less imperialistic, though not without injustice, exploitation. Okay. Take some more questions? It's 3 o'clock now. Yeah, we can take. No, I think we'll finish this session. I don't want to stay until 4 o'clock, so I want to finish the session in the next 10-15 minutes. And otherwise, it will be diminishing return because I also have to stay up.
Hello, sir. My name is Akib. As advocates of the idea of global IR, we stand for the leveling of the field of IR. But do you think that the West is ready to accept this demand and that it will ensure smooth transition to the movement of global IR?
Sorry, what will accept?
Do you think that the West is ready to accept our demand?
West is ready to.
The West, okay. Okay, no, the West is not ready yet. But the West is not a singular entity. So I think the Europeans are much more willing to do this. The Americans are much less willing to do this. And the Canadians are in between. The Australians are willing to do this as long as it's Asia related. So West is not a singular entity. And I think you'll find a lot more resonance of global IR in Europe than in the United States. The United States is the least ready to take on global IR. There's a good reason for it, because the US is sitting number one. Why give up its privilege? So if you are already the richest and the most powerful, you don't want to give up your power and influence. So they don't want to. There is a little bit of that in my article. No, not in this one. The next, the follow-up article. Opinion polls have shown that Americans recognize that IR, large majority of American IR scholars recognize, like almost 75%, that IR is Western-centric or US-centric, or nearly Western-centric or US-centric. But only less than 50% think we should do something about it. Because they are number one, and they don't want to, why do you change the status quo? Why are you doing so well? So that's why the task is very difficult. And the American also students get training in a much more narrow way than Europeans. They all read the same old literature going back to the 50s, Mercantile, Walls, Cohen, and also they read, the liberals as well. The Europeans, I know a few universities. I certainly do know Oxford very well because of my own involvement with them. I think they do read a lot more of global IR stuff So as London School of Economics does a lot more global. I just went back to where I gave the launch of my book in LSE, SOAS, and a few other places, and I'm going to Oxford to launch this book in November. I think Germany as well. So there's a lot more reception, positive reception of global IR in Europe than in the United States.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Devera Singh. I'm a master's student in University of Delhi. Sir, my question is that how will global IR affect the functioning and legitimacy of IOs in multipolar world?
Continue.
How will global IR affect the functioning and legitimacy of international organizations in a multipolar world?
International organization.
Thank you, sir.
Well, international organization is one part of IR, and it's certainly very important. We use the terms global governance more than international organization now. The term now is global governance. And like global IR, global governance is broadening, and there are more willingness to accept different forms of global governance. So until very recently, maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, the term global governance would not be recognized by a lot of scholars. So the term was international organization. But a lot of that stuff was about UN. So the UN at various institutions. There was very little recognition for non-state actors, private actors in international cooperation. Now, if you talk about global governance, very few people think of this as an organization thing, driven by an UN or an organization with a bureaucracy and a charter. They'll see it as much more informal, much more broad. They still have rules and norms and institutions, but you don't really equate global cooperation or global governance with formal institutions. So we'll recognize, much more recognition is given to partnerships like government, private sector, corporations, foundations, and civil society. There are many forms of global governance that are based on this sort of a partnership. Sometimes it's called complex governance, hybrid governance, or fragmentation, or I call it pluralization. So it's no longer about formal international organizations. There are more things happening than within the UN system. Regional organizations are important, and the like. So because of that, there is a kind of a symbiotic, a positive relationship between global IR and global governance, because global governance has become broader, broadening one part of what I call global IR, cooperation. Global IR is doing that at the macro level. So global IR and global cooperation or international organization are both relatively new and transformational concepts. And both seek to broaden global IR, broadens traditional IR, global governance broadens traditional international organization. And I think that's basically very positive. Okay, another question? From the top over there?
So many scholars still frame the Indo-Pacific through the lens of US-China rivalry, specifically realists. But you have argued for a multipolar and complex regional order. How does global IR help us understand the agency of middle powers like India, Japan, or Asian in shaping the multipolarity rather than being mere responders to great power politics?
So are you saying India is a middle power?
Yeah, it is a regional
I
power.
think that will be quite questionable these days, isn't it? India's economy is larger than Britain and France. So why are they considered great powers and India isn't?
Fourth largest economy recently.
But
Yeah.
it is still
No, I
behind
mean, what you
China.
were saying, like 10 years ago, I would have said, yeah, India is a middle power. I think India is quite in the, I don't see this necessarily as a privilege or status. Can be a burden too. But I would think, anyway, think about that. I see India as a great power. But the idea of multipolarity and the role of so-called classic middle powers, whether it's Japan or Canada or Australia, and Indonesia is a middle power, South Korea is a middle power. Now their roles are changing, and that's why I don't believe in multipolarity. Multipolarity is a club of great powers only. So most of the BRICS are not great powers, right? So South Africa, not a great power. Brazil is not a great power. And the newly recruited BRICS members, like Saudi Arabia, for example, not a great power. Iran, okay, let's forget about Iran. It is an exceptional case because it's constrained by a lot of international sanctions and all. But a relatively free, very wealthy actor like Saudi Arabia is not a great power. But they play an important role. But they have no role in multipolarity. Multipolarity, if you get the classic definition, is a great power club. Power is defined in terms of economic and military power, not ideas and leadership. There are a lot of leadership and ideas come from countries like in the past, Canada, Australia, Norway, now coming from Japan, Korea, and Indonesia. But they are not great powers. Multipolarity cannot handle this, the role of ideas and leadership, the disjuncture between influence and ideas. So I don't buy multipolarity as a useful term, or any polarity, unipolar, bipolar, multipolar. I see world order as a much broader thing, product of much broader set of forces than just material power. Now, another thing about multipolarity is that, and middle powers are part of it. So multipolarity doesn't really give space to middle powers because you think you are a client of a great power. So I used to tell my Australian friends that when Australia was trying to be part of the talk about multipolarity, I said you won't have a chance in a multipolar system because you are going to be basically subsumed under the United States. Some Australians have no problems with it, but a lot of them have problems with it. Okay, status aside, I think the multipolarity is also misunderstood. So we often associate multipolarity with conflict, rivalry and conflict, because that's basically what Europe was like before 1945. So multipolarity, the idea that we have a multipolarity today came mainly from 19th century, early 20th century Europe, leading to 2 world wars. So people think multipolar means disorder, and American hegemony is order. Now, I have argued that multipolarity, even as a distribution of power, can be peacefully managed. And that's why we talk about the Amarna system. I have this article in Foreign Policy, just came out, discusses the Amarna diplomacy of the 15th century, around the middle of the second millennium BC, where great powers of the Near East managed relations quite peacefully. Relatively speaking, those great powers, Egypt, Mitanni, Hatti, Babylon, and Assyria. So I don't mind multipolarity if it broadens its base of example base, or derives its ideas from global history, not just from the 19th, 20th century European history. But I still think it's inadequate as a term. So middle powers have a role in world order, and multipolarity constrains them. And they don't have agency. And not regional powers, regional institutions, international institutions, corporations, they play a role. Multipolarity constrains them. That's why I use the term multiplex rather than multipolar. And that's a different thing. May talk about it tomorrow. Okay? No more questions? Maybe they're all tired of listening to me. And we can continue some of this tomorrow.
Have some questions tomorrow as well.
Yeah,
so
I think we should. Yeah,
we should close the session. You will be a bit tired as well.
yeah.
So we'll leave and they'll continue. So we'll move and they'll continue with some other program.
Yeah.
here.
Okay. So very good to meet you today, and we'll see you tomorrow.
We are done with this. But you all still
There is some program for you. Leaving. For some more time, you have to stay. Last I will tell you what to do. this for me or this for? Okay, I see. I have acute shortage of space for luggage, but I certainly take this. Yeah, but let's see what my son thinks of it. Yeah, yeah.
Friends, be seated. We'll have a round of introduction of all the participants, and also what in the coming 2 days we are going to have discussion or other course of action. So Dr. Rahat Hassan will be telling, as well as you know, you all will have an opportunity to interact um, together. Okay, so please be seated.